Now it's time for a look through the press now with Dipti. She's starting with reactions to the text of the agreement between the US and Iran. On you, Dipti.
Yeah, that's right, Stuart. You'd be hard-pressed to find really any paper that thinks that this deal is actually good for the US. Let's start with Libération, the French left-wing paper, whose editors here say that even in Ayatollah Khamenei's wildest dreams, he could not have imagined this outcome for a war that Donald Trump started himself. Why Iran is the winner, that's what Libé says on its front page there.
What reactions have you found in the press then?
Well, you have the conservative Wall Street Journal, which reminds us that Iran really held the Strait of Hormuz hostage during the war. The Memorandum of Understanding, it says, will, quote, formalize this extortion into a new, worse status quo. It will also empower Iran to define the future administration of Hormuz. From Iran, the Tehran Times takes potshots today at Iranian opposition groups, saying that the U.S. and Israel really courted them and relied on these exiled opposition figures, these exiled Iranian opposition figures, to advance their regime-changing plans. Once the, quote, geopolitical winds shifted, they were discarded without ceremony. So the view from Iran clearly is that that Tehran is the one holding all the power. You also have a lot of anger from the Israeli press, notably this op-ed from the conservative Times of Israel, which calls Donald Trump's deal with Iran a, quote, catastrophic capitulation to Iran's aggressors, and one which leaves Israel vulnerable. It laments Trump's new, quote, reality-challenged view of Israel as an ingrate and a warmonger, and of Iran as rational.
Now, European leaders are meeting in Brussels today to figure out a way to reduce the trade imbalances with China.
Well, L'Opinion, the French right-wing paper, offers up one figure that pretty much says it all: 32 billion euros. That is that is Europe's trade deficit with China right now, according to Eurostat. And European leaders are meeting this Thursday and Friday to figure out a way out of this deficit. Now, the EU Observer says in its analysis that the problem is, how do European leaders stand up to China without invoking the risk of a devastating trade war? China, the website says, is like Voldemort, or rather he who shall not be named. They try and address the issue without actually naming China, and proof of that is when they sit down to dinner today, they will not be discussing anti-China trade measures, which is exactly what they're discussing, but rather, I quote, global macroeconomic imbalances. That's how it's been put to the leaders attending that dinner this Thursday. Call it what you will. The state-run Chinese daily Global Times says that for a long time, Europe saw China as the, quote, receiver of international rules, not the maker of them. Well, the tides have turned now, and at least when it comes to rare earths and critical minerals, Europe is the one with the structural dependency on China and not the other way around.
Quick word now on the World Cup. Good news for England, not so much good news for Portugal, though.
Yeah, that's right. And if we were able to crown, front page of the day, this one would be it, Stuart. The Sun, a very inspired headline here: Texas Canes score massacre.
Very clever.
It says after the Three Lions won their game against Croatia 4-2, they played that in Dallas, of course. Not a great day for Cristiano Ronaldo's team, though. Portugal only managing a timid 1-1 draw against Congo's Leopards. Abola, this is a Portuguese daily, clearly worried about Cristiano Ronaldo's form at this World Cup.
Europe set to suffer through yet another heatwave. Temperatures are certainly rising here in Paris this week. And the question is, what is acceptable attire? Dipti, wearing black, that's not a good start.
Probably not a good start. Wearing a suit, not a good start either. But you know what? For once, this question is not directed at women, but at men.
Okay.
So the question is a rather existential question that El País is asking today, Stuart. How many buttons can men unbutton to make it socially acceptable? Do you button up all the way to the top like you're doing, Stuart? Or
well,
do you
I've got a tie.
Or do you button it all the way down like they, some kind of 1970s Hollywood style? style, or maybe Burt Reynolds in the 1980s who kind of did it halfway up. Well, what's certain is going shirtless this summer is a big no-no, at least in French resort towns, because the Times of London tells us that men will be fined 150 euros if there is a nipple or two seen in public. And to quote the brilliant journalist who wrote this article, Carol Midgley from the Times, I quote, "Even when the pecs are so toned and sculpted they look like two taut buttocks gaffer taped to a sternum, it is not pleasing alongside a rippling torso sheened with sweat that puddles on a plastic chair and emanates a musky pong that says, 'I take too much protein powder and have breath that could stun a rhinoceros.'" Stuart, if that is not poetry, I do not know what is.
You've had two bits of beautifully written text, that and the World Cup headline as well. Nipple rings, that's the answer, isn't it?
Nipple rings.
Yeah, that's all you need.
That's always the answer to everything.
Exactly. Dip tea with the papers off for us 24. A lot more coming up after the break. Stay with us.